Hi everyone, my name is Josh Broltheim, and today we're going to be talking about Sumo Logic, more particularly the Level 1 certification and becoming a Sumo Pro user. So what we're going to be going through today, let me get the slide, there we go, is becoming a Sumo Pro user. All of the information today is the prerequisite to taking the first certification exam. We're going to be going through some demos, some slides, going to try and make it interactive for you. Certainly, if you have questions, if you want to go ahead and post those in the chat, I'll periodically try and look over there and grab them. So this will be the first certification step we're going to discuss today. What are we more specifically going to be going over with the Sumo Pro user webinar today? First thing is, how does Sumo Logic help me? Certainly, we're going to go in and show you some examples of how Sumo can help you. Of course, seeing what data is available so you can analyze. You now may have access to Sumo Logic, and you might not be sure exactly where to start. And one of the things we'll show you is how to go ahead and start to see what type of data is available in your environment, so you can start to begin doing queries and looking and analyzing that data. How can I search, parse, and analyze my data? We'll be going through some examples to show you some of the features within Sumo Logic and how you can take advantage of those to create queries and dive into your data and get a better feel for what's going on. Certainly, how can you monitor trends and critical events? We'll show you a variety of different ways of monitoring and looking at those things. And then where do you go from here? So after today's webinar, what's the next steps for you? The tutorial, I'll be doing some tutorial work in a little bit, but certainly I would encourage you in the future, if you want to go ahead and do the using Sumo Logic tutorial on your own, that would be a great step for you to go ahead and get some hands-on experience with the product. In order to access that, you can do so via the tutorial link here. So going to help.sumologic.com and just searching for using Sumo's tutorial. Or if you actually log into your instance and go to the Learn tab, you'll have access to that same information. So a couple different ways to get access to that. As far as questions after today, we would direct you to our community. We've established a great community where users and organizations can go ahead and interact with each other and ask each other questions and discuss use cases and see how other individuals are using different features of Sumo Logic. And then we have a Slack channel that you can use for a live conversation as well. So a couple different options there. And of course, you have access to documentation, support, the typical things you would have access to get help when needed. This last slide is just about the certification exam itself. The first one is the Level 1 exam, which is what we're kind of prepping for today. It's going to be an online exam of 30 multiple choice questions, 60-minute time limit. It's great for you guys to take, for you to prove your Sumo Logic skills to yourself, to your employer. It's a free exam. You can take it on your own time. And once you're done, you come away with a certificate, and then you can post it on your LinkedIn or your resume, and now you've learned a new skill. So it's meant to be a learning opportunity for yourself, and a great way to just prove, like I mentioned, your Sumo Logic knowledge. So how does Sumo Logic help me? Great question. And actually, I'm going to dive into a demo first. So let's go ahead and I'm going to dive into this demo with Travel Logic. What Travel Logic is, for at least today's demo purposes, is a website where you can go ahead and book flights, book hotels. I'm sure you guys have all used sites similar to this before. And so this is our production system where a user can go ahead and purchase airfare or, like I said, hotels or what have you. I get a call from my manager, and he tells me, oh, people can't check out of Travel Logic. Well, if they can't check out, that's a problem. If they can't check out, that means, one, they can't book those flights for themselves, so the customer service experience is certainly going to be degraded. And also, we don't make revenue. If people can't check out and book those flights and hotels, well, that's how we make our revenue, and so that's going to be a problem. So I get that piece of information from my manager. At the same time, I get a Slack message. I can't really show the Slack message here right now for some reason, but I do have it on my screen that's showing information about some spikes in CPU usage related to the travel app. So I've now received an alert via Slack, and as well as that phone call from my manager letting me know, hey, something's going on. So at this point, I have those two pieces of information. People can't check out, and something related to a high CPU is taking place. Now I need to go ahead and figure out what's going on and more importantly, how to solve it. So I'm going to dive into Sumo Logic. And what I've created here is a dashboard of operation services that are taking place. So let me go ahead and refresh this real quick. And now I have an up-to-date view of things that are going on within my Travelogic environment. And so what we see here, these panels are now loaded, there we go, is we see a bunch of different panels that are green and red. And for example, we see reporting nodes as green, green being good, red being bad. So even if we don't really know what these panels are doing, we can still get a feel for some bad things are certainly going on. And if we look at our checkout service, we see it's a red, so that's certainly a bad sign. And we see about 4,000 errors related to checkout service. Well, I know people can't check out, and now I'm starting to see logs related to the checkout service having issues. So this is where I want to go ahead and dive in and start to do kind of my detective work to see what's going on exactly. Once I dive into my services detail view, I have a variety of different panels that are going to show me information about, well, the services. The first panel I have up here is related to my bookings. So what I see here is in green, the bookings were successful and they were humming along successfully until about, was this, about 8:51. And then all of a sudden a large amount of fails started to occur, which means people can't book. So that kind of corresponds with the time that I received my Slack message, about the time my manager called me. So from a time standpoint, I know something's going on around this 8:50-ish time period. Now, certainly I need to figure out what's going on. But I have some more information here. I have errors over the last 7 days. And I see actually, this is for a 1 hour time period. And I see once again, this orange is representing the errors for today. And I see once again about 8:51, 8:49, give or take, errors started to occur. So that's once again, just kind of corresponding to the information I know. More information that I have available to me, errors by node. We'll discuss things like source name in a little bit, but what I see if I mouse over this is there's a lot of errors related to the node of source name csteam.travel-checkout. Well, I know there's checkout issues, and this is kind of, once again, kind of corroborating, okay, there are errors in the checkout node related to the source name. So I'm on the right track of, certainly looking for that checkout culprit. Two more graphs I want to show you, or panels. Gateway latency over here. So what I see here is a threshold has been determined for a appropriate gateway latency. So as long as our gateway latency is within this threshold, it's considered normal or static, I guess you could say. However, over here, I have a pink triangle, which is starting to represent an outlier or something that has occurred outside of the norm. And once again, I see at about 8:50, 8:51, the outlier occurs. So the threshold was expecting to be that flat normal 569 to 592, and it spiked to 790. If I look at 8:51, it spiked even higher. And so that's representing this outlier. And then this bubbles or cloud kind of look is representing the upper and lower limits of that threshold. So once again, just kind of confirming, hey, something happened with our latency at about 8:50, 8:51, give or take. And then finally, we have a CPU and total memory view up here related to our metrics. And what we're seeing here is, once again, about 8:50 or so, we see a big spike here related to the CPU. And so my Slack message that I received mentioned CPU. And so this, once again, just corresponds to what I think I already know and what I think I'm looking for and going down that right track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill into these metrics and see if I can find out a little bit more about what's going on with the CPU spike. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, why it's occurring. So what I'm now looking at is the metrics related to CPU and total memory. Well, the Slack message I received mentioned CPU, so I'm going to actually disregard memory usage for two reasons. One, I'm going to remove it just to clean up the screen a little bit, and because, as I just mentioned, I have indications that the source name is or the culprit is related more to CPU. So I'm going to click on this metrics line right here, and it's going to turn off the memory usage. And then I'm going to go ahead and refresh, and the graph should be cleaned up a little bit, not too much, but a little bit cleaner. So what I see now is, that spike, as I mentioned, and what we want to figure out what's causing this, and more importantly, how to resolve it. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm looking at metrics, and I want to go ahead and overlay my logs related to things that may have occurred related to checkout service. So I'm going to go ahead and go to here and specify some logs that I want to look at. I'm going to specify the source category of CS Team Travel Checkout because we had an indication that that was where we were seeing a bunch of errors. So I'm going to look at that, specifically that set of data. The other thing I'm going to do at this point is look for the string of error. So I want to see all the errors that occurred within our logs over the past hour. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this right now. When I do, what I have at the very top of the screen is a heat map. And what this is indicating is occurrences or matches to the log information that I'm looking for right here. So essentially we see from about 8:15 to 8:45, there were no mentions or occurrences of the string of error. And then at about 8:50, 8:51, we start to see some occurrences of the string error, which is related potentially to what's causing the error related to the CPU, related to checkout and all that. So it's starting to give us some information on where to dig in further. This heat map at the very top is color oriented, if you will. And so what we have here is prior to 8:50, there were no occurrences of the string error. And then we start to see some occurrences here. And the darker the color, the more frequent the occurrence. And these are all sliced into 1 minute time chunks, essentially. So we have we're looking at the last 60 minutes of data, and then our heat map is broken out into 1 minute slices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these slices and drill into it a little bit deeper and look at the logs related to this 1 minute time period. So I'm going to grab the time period, do a shift click, and I'm going to be opened up into my logs. And so now what I'm looking at are the logs related to the error, the string of error. And I see, related down here, I see error, error processing credit card payment, error checkout, error SSL routines related to get server certificate. So I'm starting to get a better picture of what's going on, but I want to adjust my query in two different ways. The first is I want to look for things that didn't occur during 8:52 to 8:53. I'm trying to figure out what caused those errors. So I'm going to go ahead and increase my query and my search to the last 60 minutes. So let's go ahead and see what has been occurring over the past hour. The other thing is I'm trying to figure out what caused these errors. And more than likely, this is a bit of an assumption, but the thing that caused the errors was not error itself. So I'm going to remove the string of error and basically say, show me everything related to the CS team travel checkout over the last hour. And let's see how many logs we get. And we get 57,000 results, or 2,300 pages of results. Now, I certainly could start to manually go through 2,300 pages to see if I could find what's going on, but that's really not an efficient use of my time or of a valuable system like Sumo Logic. So I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of one of the advanced analytics features we have called log reduce. And I'm just going to click on the log reduce button. And what log reduce is going to do is it's going to take all 57,000 log messages and group them together in similarities. And it's still loading, so let's give it a moment. But you can see that the pattern matching is taking place right here. So we see a large amount that had a transaction ID, which would be a successful transaction or checkout. So that's a good sign. We see charging credit via gateway, starting card checkout process. Just gonna give this another moment to load, but we see all these being grouped together. And it looks like it's just about finished. Cool. There we go. So I now have, instead of 2,000 pages, I now have one page that has these commonalities or similar messages grouped together. And we even see some messages, bad messages, or not bad, but error messages related to the SSL routine, related to certificate down here. So I'm starting to get a better picture of what's going on. But what I'm looking for is that needle in the haystack to figure out what caused all these errors. And I still haven't found that. But I can take advantage of these log reduce to help me see if I can find that. So rather than looking at something that occurred 9,000 times, 7,000 times, etc., I'm looking for that thing that occurred once, twice, less frequently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my count and just flip it around. So instead of looking at most frequent, look at least frequent. And right at the top, I see what I believe to be my culprit. I have Travelogic apps, starting cluster, checkout. All right, we've been looking at the checkout service, version 1.14 dev. Well, why was development code loaded on production server? Oh, and kind of ta-da. So somebody went ahead and loaded development code on a production server, and as a result, that messed up the server certificates, and as a result, that messed up the checkout service. And so what we did there was a quick demo of how you can utilize Sumo Logic to go ahead and dig through your logs, look at your metrics, and figure out what was going on. So let's go jump back to the slides here. So back to the slides. What we just looked at was a couple different components of monitoring troubleshooting. The first was alerting. So we used the dashboard to use the color scheme of green good, red bad to help indicate something was wrong. We used Slack so that we were able to be alerted of that critical event without sitting in Sumo Logic. We don't want you sitting there 24/7 staring at a dashboard waiting for it to turn red. You can be notified via these mechanisms as well as some other ones that we should be able to look into later. We used the metrics to identify what was going on, and what was going on was that high CPU usage, the spike, and so we were able to use those metrics to identify what was going on. And then we tied it together with our logs to identify why it was happening. And so the what was going on was the high CPU, the why was the development code was being loaded on a production environment. And so that's how we were able to use Sumo Logic to tie it all together. Sumo Logic Dataflow, some basics that you certainly should be aware of related to Dataflow. And there's three components here that exist within the environment. The first is data collection. We're not going to go into data collection too much. I do have one other slide that I'll show shortly. But the idea behind data collection is your data needs to be brought into Sumo Logic in order for it to be analyzed. So essentially using collectors, which are going to be little mechanisms that can be used to grab that data from outside sources. It would be brought into Sumo Logic, and then you would be able to query upon that. And as mentioned, we don't really cover data collection in this call. We've covered very deeply in level 3, the Sumo Power Admin, if you're interested in that. A second component is searching and analyzing. So you now have all this data sitting in Sumo Logic. Now you need to do something with it. Using operators, using charts, you would start to develop queries that would allow you to, as I mentioned, search your data, analyze it, and go through and see what's in there and what's going to be useful for you. And we'll go through some examples of searching and analyzing in just a few moments. And then finally, that last component of visualizing and monitoring. So you now have your operator set up. You're pulling these queries, and you want to be notified or be alerted when different things take place. That's where the visualizing and monitoring component comes in. So creating dashboards that are going to be useful to you and your users in your organization, where as we saw just before, at a simple glance, they could see, oh, something bad is going on, or everything is all good. And then those alerts, so that, as I mentioned again, so you don't need to just sit in Sumo Logic staring at a dashboard all day. You can still be notified of things outside of the application, which is really going to be helpful for you. Cool. This is the one slide I just referred to that is going to show some information about collection and getting data into Sumo Logic. I don't want you to get too bogged down in the details in here, but the idea behind this slide is you can have a variety of different sources out there that you can all use to bring your data in. So maybe if you're using S3 or an API or using syslog or whatever, however you're generating that data, it can all be brought to Sumo Logic in a couple different ways. So, and as mentioned, level 3 is really going to cover that in detail. And then finally, one more slide here regarding metadata. So I alluded to the name source name earlier, as well as source category. What metadata tags are is essentially they're associated with each log messages that are collected. So data comes into the system, and you need a way to be able to find it essentially and pull it. And so there are going to be some metadata tags that are automatically going to be applied to that set of data. But what you can do with the source category is you can freely configure it. This is going to be your main metadata tag, and this is going to be a great way for you to go ahead and label that data so that somebody can easily find it. Rather than just looking for data from system 4821, they can go ahead and look for their Apache data, or more importantly, their Apache access data. And we'll go through some examples of source categories in a little bit. The naming convention is also, we describe it and go over in more details as how to use the source category to your benefit in the level 3 as well. So just a plug for that, which we'll be doing that webinar next week. So what data can I analyze? So you now have access to Sumo Logic. It's a great system, but it can be a little overwhelming when you first have access to it. And so you need to figure out what's available to you to go ahead and look at. I'm going to show 2 slides, or a slide, and then I'll show in app actually how to do this. So there's 2 different ways that you can go ahead. Actually, there's more than 2 ways, but 2 ways that are going to be kind of easy for you to go ahead and start to dig into your sets of data. The first is to go ahead and explore your collectors and to see what collectors have been set up to pull in that data. And so we'll look at those in a moment. And then the other way is to actually run a query. So let's go ahead and jump in the app and look at this in app. So let me go ahead and pull up my app here. And I'm going to show you two different ways. So the first way is using the managed data and going to the collection, as I was just describing, and looking at all the collectors. So here we have a lot of collectors. We have 23 pages, each page showing about 10 of them. So there's quite a lot of them in here. But what you can do is you can use the search capabilities up above to start to look for them. So let's say I want to go ahead and see, is there any Apache data? And we'll be using Apache data throughout today for the demonstration. So let's say I just go ahead and type Apache. And I see, oh, so here's some Apache Access data, and this might be data I want to utilize, and I can go ahead and bring this into a query. To do so, I can just go ahead and click on Open in Log Search, this little icon right there, and then right away I'm looking at that set of data. So that's one way to start to dig into the data and see what's in there, and then ultimately look specifically for the information that you're interested in. The other way is to actually do a query within the application. So let me go ahead and do this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new tab. And what I'm going to do is do a very simple query. I'm going to go ahead and look through our entire set of data. So I'm going to do a wildcard or a star saying pull back all the data, and then do a new line and do a count by source category. And once I run this, what I should get back is a list of all source categories that have data for the last 15 minutes. And so what I see down here is, let me go ahead and sort this by count to make it a little more organized. But I see here now there's a lot of Kubernetes data, 222,000 messages over the last 15 minutes, a lot of Graphite data, Apache Access, etc. So this is a lot of labs data. What we've done here essentially is preloaded the system with data that we can and you can utilize and play around with. So like I said, we'll be using the labs Apache Access data today. But so this is a good way that I can see what's available, what's populated, and then go ahead and start to do my queries. Let's go ahead and jump into the slides once again. And the next thing is, how can I analyze my data? So now you have access to Sumo Logic. Now even you may have identified the source categories or the collectors that you want to access and start to play around with. How can you easily access and analyze your data? The first thing I want to show you is the ability to use or search for shared content. So what you can do is you can basically see, has someone already analyzed the same data? Maybe somebody in your organization has already done essentially the heavy lifting and created queries, and you can go ahead and utilize those. So let's go ahead and look at that. So what I can do, let me expand that out a tiny bit, and I can go over here into my library, and what I can now see is all these different things that other people have created. So maybe I want to go ahead and see in here some of the content that Ben created. I can jump into Ben's demos, and I can see, oh, here he created some information. Oh, weather dashboard, what's this? And I can go ahead and open it and look at it and decide, is this something that is going to be useful for me? And this is, this is kind of cool, actually. Looking at temperature and current weather and all this, this certainly could be useful in an inappropriate situation. And so maybe I want to go ahead and just, kind of grab this and take advantage of it and utilize it. And so here I have something that he did already. And I can keep looking and see other things that he did or any other users that have shared content with me. And so that's going to be a great starting point to see, like I mentioned just a few moments ago, has anybody done that heavy lifting for you and created content already? But let's say nobody has. So now you have access to, I'm going to use that Apache Access example again. And so nobody has done, anything that you can utilize yet. What you can take advantage of is what we call apps. And what the apps are is, as it says kind of right here, if you can read it, apps are designed to accelerate your time to value with Sumo Logic. They're pre-configured searches and dashboards for the most common use cases. So one of the things about logs, and it's kind of cool about logs, or as cool as logs can be, is they follow the same file format. And let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll speak to it as we're going through it. So I'm in the app catalog, and let's say I want to go ahead and bring in my Apache data. what I'm doing here with this app catalog is overlaying some predefined or pre-created queries and dashboards that have already been developed by Sumo Logic, basically the kind of most popular use cases, if you will. And so I have my Apache data. I want to go ahead and start using these Apache queries and dashboards, but I need that help of how to do that. And that's where the apps come in. So to set it up, all I do is go to Apache, and I see all these different, in this case, the orange here are queries. These are dashboards in the green. And I say, you know, all these things are now going to be available to me. And these things look kind of cool. If I look at the preview, I can see a preview of these things. And, you know, here's going to be a visitor location graph, or a map rather. Here's going to be information about traffic distribution by server. And this all looks like stuff that could be valuable to me, particularly in the context of looking at Apache access logs. So what I'm going to do to set this up, very simple. I'm just going to go to Add to Library, and I'm going to go ahead and specify in the source category the source category that I want to look at, which is going to be that Labs Apache Access. And the search ahead is helping me with that. Access. And then I'm going to click Add to Library. And what it's doing is it's very simply just taking these queries and overlaying them into your source category. And it's done, very quick process. And now I have access to these. So let's say I want to go ahead and look at, I don't know, let's say the top browsers. I can just click on this link. And what's occurring in the query window is very simply our source category has been overlaid in here. And then the rest of the hard work has already been completed and is being parsed using the regex here to pull out things like source IP, and then methods, status code, refer, all these different fields. But ultimately what we're looking at then below is the user agent. So what I now have access to is the user agent, which is user agent, if you're not aware, is information about your browser. You go to a website and certain information about your browser is transmitted to that website. Things like OS, browser version, time zone, all those kind of things are sent over. And so here I'm able to view that, and I'm able to view my count appropriately as well. And so maybe I want to go to another one. Maybe I want to go back to the my folder I just created, and maybe this time I want to pull up a dashboard. And so now I have access to my Apache overview dashboard. It's going to load, take a second or two. And then I have access to, for example, my visitor locations all in a map. And so once again, without doing any of that heavy lifting, I've now found a way to display information about my data in a very simple way, or somewhat simple way, using the dashboards. But I didn't have to do any coding. I didn't have to do any programming, any queries. It was all done automatically for me, which is pretty cool. And these can be great starting points. I can also use these as a jumping off point to go ahead and edit these and modify them if I wanted to. So cool, wanted to show you apps and make sure you're aware of those. Let's go ahead and jump back to the slides. And so now let's go ahead and jump into queries and the syntax and how to set them up. So let me go ahead and just dive in here in app and just start showing what we have. So I'm going to do a new log search because I want to start from scratch and really start with the basics. So let's say I want to go ahead and do a very simple search on the word or the string Mozilla. What I can do is go to my search window and type in Mozilla. And now what's happening is a case-insensitive search is occurring across the last 15 minutes. So this is important to note the time ranges. And then I see in the middle here, I see a histogram. So I'm taking my last 15 minutes of that I queried upon, and I'm having that data split up into minute chunks. So I'm seeing the total messages received is about 250,000 for the last 15 minutes. And then in these 1 minute chunks, I'm seeing how many messages have been returned. So 16,000, almost 17,000, et cetera. And then down below, I see the actual message itself. So I see all the different messages that had the string of Mozilla in there. And these are going to be all different types of categories of data, but this is a very broad search to begin with. So the other cool thing is down here in the results, we are always going to see our timestamp, and then the string will be highlighted in the message. So here we see Mozilla, and once again, remember it's case insensitive, which is why we're seeing the capital M being highlighted. And then down below here, we have a field browser. This is going to show us information about the fields that are going to be available to be queried upon. I'll get into that in a few moments. We'll start to play with some better examples in there. But let's go ahead and now start to modify this search. So instead of just looking for Mozilla, let's say we want to go ahead and look at our source category of Apache access. As I mentioned earlier, that's what we're going to be using today. So I'm going to do source category equals labs Apache access. Access. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and see what returns. When I hit start or enter, I'm going to be doing a query here. There's going to be an implied end. So this and that are the same thing. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I just want to show out on the screen, there's a lot on the screen, is related to the time feature. So at this point, what I'm doing is searching by the default last 15 minutes. But let's say I want to modify that time. I have a variety of different ways I can handle that. So the first way is I can go ahead and click on the relative, click on the time and click on relative. And I have some predefined time periods. So maybe I want to search for the last 3 hours or last 24 hours or so on and so forth. I can go ahead and do so. So maybe I want to search for the last 3 days. I can go ahead and do that. Another option I have is I can go to custom and I can go ahead and use the calendar to specifically say, I want to search from, it's already set up here. I want to search from August 7th to August 15th, from 12 a.m. to, I don't know, 3, 4, 30 a.m. I can go ahead and be very specific with that time period. So that's a second option for time. The third option, as you may notice up here, is I have, for when I chose my last 3 days, it showed -3D. And what I can do is take advantage of that naming convention for my time. So what I can do is, let's say I want to go ahead and do the last 15 minutes. I can just do -15M, and it's going to do last 15 minutes. Maybe I want to do the last 27 minutes, -27M. Maybe you want to do the last 3 days or 2 days. That wasn't an option in relative, -2D, et cetera, et cetera. The other way I can use this is to define a time period with a start and an end. So maybe I want to do from the last 28 minutes to the last 16 minutes. And it's only going to grab that 12-minute time period in between and pull back data. So a variety of different ways to handle time, and certainly worth pointing out. The other thing on here that I would point out at this point is the use receipt time. What this is going to allow you to do is search for messages based on when they were received, not necessarily the dates parsed from them. So that's going to be another option that's going to be available to you. So that maybe you ingest your data right now, but that data contains data from 2 months ago. You would want to make sure that you are using the appropriate use receipt time for right now. However, if you don't use receipt time, you would want to go ahead and search for the last 2 months because that data would essentially be dated from back then. So just a couple options to keep in mind. And I'll go over this middle section in a few moments because this is worth pointing out, but I'm going to skip it for right now. So let's go ahead and start to build upon our query. So we now are pulling our Apache Access data. We're specifically looking for the string of Mozilla, but now we want to go ahead and dig deeper. So one of the things we can go ahead and do is start to look for status codes and pull some information about that. And I'll be using the status codes as the example for the next, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. If you aren't aware of status codes and how they are utilized, probably the best example is if you've ever gone to a page and data is not there and you get a 404 and it says file not found or page not found, that would be a 404 status code. And that would be a perfect example of what we're referring to when we talk about status codes. The other status code we'll be looking at as an example would be a 200, which would be a successful. So for right now, just keep in mind 404 is bad, 200 is good, and we'll play with those in a little bit more detail. So right here we have our log message for Labs Apache Access, or more specifically just Apache Access in general. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the cool things about logs, or as cool as they can be, is that they follow a standard format. So an Apache Access log is always going to be the same, and it's always going to follow this pattern. And even if you don't really know what's going on with the log, we can kind of visually see what's going on. So we see an IP address, and then we see a space, and we see a dash, and we see a space, and we see a dash. We see time information in here. We see over here, here's our status code, and that's what we'll be playing with in just a moment. And then we see other components of it, size information, referrer information, and then that user information. So let's say we want to go ahead and start digging into those status codes and extracting them and reporting on them. How are we going to do so? Essentially, what we need to do at this point is start telling the system, hey, look over here and identify that as a status code. And so how do we do that? There's a couple different ways that we can handle that. The first way I'm going to show you is what we call parse anchor. Very simply, what we do is utilize the UI here, and we can just go ahead and highlight some of the text. So we're just going to highlight from here to there. And I'm going to go to parse to select the text. And what I'm going to do now is go through this part of the message and essentially label these into fields. So I'm going to take this portion right here, and I'm going to click to extract this value. I'm going to have a star, and I'm going to go ahead and name that star or name that field. And I'm going to call that a URL. I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to keep going through here. I'm going to go ahead and say this portion is the status code. So I'm going to click to extract this value and do status code. The name I choose here is totally up to me. You do need to use one word, so you can't use spaces, but you can use underscore. But I could call it status, I could call it status code, I could call it status underscore code. The name is totally up to me, but it should be something that certainly you would be able to identify. And if you ever shared this query with someone else, you would want to identify. So you would want to use some common naming techniques, but of course, like I said, it's up to you. And let me go ahead and finish this. So I'm going to go ahead and take this guy and call that the size. And then finally, this middle portion here is the referrer. And I'm going to go ahead and submit. And when I do, what's going to happen at the top of the screen is I'm going to go ahead and have that parse statement labeled here or identified. And essentially what it's going to do is start to do some pattern recognition. So it's going to look for the first quotation. It's going to look for the word get. It's going to look for a space. After that space, it's going to, whatever it finds, that will be the URL. It's going to look for another space. It's going to look for HTTP 1.1, then look for space, and so on and so forth. So it's doing that pattern recognition. And when I go ahead and click Start now, what should occur is now those fields are have been created for me, and I have each message is going to have that identification information there. So what I see here is I see my time and I see my messages that I was just seeing, but then in between I have all those fields that I created. So I have my referrer, I have my size, I have my status code, which is what we'll be playing with in a few moments, and then my URL. And now what I can do is I can start to create a query upon a status code. And I will go ahead and do that in a moment. Another way you can go ahead and extract these fields is you can go ahead and just use regex. So maybe you've used regex before. Regex is not a Sumo Logic thing. It's more of an international standard at this point, if you will. And if you've used regex, you can go ahead and identify these fields using regex. So for example, if you want to go ahead and identify the IP address, you could use the regex that is used for IP address, which essentially would look for number.number.number.number. And that would be a perfectly suitable way to do that. There is a third way to go ahead and extract these fields, and I'll go ahead and show that to you right now. And that is going to be using what we call field extraction rules. So what you see here is we have some fields that we did not create. So we have some IP, we have a size field, we have a variety of different fields that are available to us. And what I've done, or really I didn't even do, somebody did for me when setting it up, is set up a field extraction rule. And the way the field extraction rules work is upon ingestion, the pattern matching is going to occur, and these fields are going to be created, and the data will be associated with them. So let's go ahead and look at the settings and field extraction rules. And here we see a wide variety of them. Let's see, for the Apache one that we've been using, do I still have? I don't have an Apache rule here. Here's one. And so what's occurring here is basically this rule has been set up, and so that any data that comes in for demo Apache access will automatically be parsed out and have fields created for it. And so essentially what's going to happen is a field extraction rule will go ahead and say, okay, I know where the IP address is. Look for number.number.number.number, call that an IP address, or more specifically in this case, call it source_IP. Then keep going. Do the regex, look for method, find that, look for the URL, look for the status code, and so on and so forth. And so basically, it's just going through upon ingestion and applying these fields to the data. And then you can go ahead and when you create your query, you can take advantage of these fields, and you don't need to do the parsing that I just did. You can automatically call status code or any of these others. So that's going to be a really great way for you to take advantage of what's been done with the setup of field extraction rules and allow you to go ahead and parse that data out. But let's go back to our example and continue further. So now we have these fields, and now let's say we want to go ahead and start to report on them. So we're now have a field for status code. So let's go ahead and see over the last 15 minutes, account by status code. To do so, we're going to just enter another line. When we enter another line, we're going to use the pipe as a separator. And very simply, we're just going to do count by status code. When I hit enter, I'm going to get a new tab for aggregates. And what's going on with the aggregates tab is essentially all the mathematical stuff is going to be displayed in this tab. So I still have my original messages that is showing all the information here. But when I do count, I have my aggregation occur. And now I see over the last 15 minutes, there's been 32,200 status codes. And those are those successful ones, which is good. So we see a lot, the majority of occurrences were related to, proper connections. We see a bunch of 404s, that's kind of concerning. And then we see some other status codes, and we don't need to get into specifics of what they are, but these are things that you might need to be aware of and do actions based on. But let's go deeper with these status codes. So right now what I'm looking at is that total count by status code over the last 15 minutes. But what if I want to start to look at trends over time? Let's say the count of the status codes over time, but in 1 minute increments. I can do so, and let me show you how to do it. To do so is going to be pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and add a new operator up here for time slice. And the time slice is basically, as I type it, the search ahead helps me both fill in the blank of the context of time slice and gives me a little information about what it is. It's going to segment data by time periods or bucket it over time range. And so what I'm going to do is 1 minute time slices. Basically, I want to see my data in 1 minute chunks. And I'm going to go ahead here and just do a count by time slice. Sorry about that. There we go, time slice and comma. And now when I hit enter, what I get is information related to the time slices and broken out by the status count. So what we see here is 939. There were 88 401s. 938, there were 7 503s. 930, there were 14 403s. So we're starting to get a little bit better picture of what was going on. These results are not great, or they're a good start, but they're not in chronological order. So let's go ahead and sort them first. So what I'm going to do very simply is I'm just going to do an order by time slice. And then I want to go ahead and put those in ascending order. So I'm just going to do order by time slice, ascending. And now I have them in ascending order. So at 931, I have them all grouped together. 932, all grouped together, etc. So this is good, but it's a bit difficult to interpret. And what I'd like to see is a list of time slices down the columns and status codes down the row. So it's more similar to transposing, which is more similar to Excel. So in order to transpose this content, very simply, I'm just going to do a new line. And I'm going to use transpose. And as I type it in, it's going to tell me that transpose will transpose the aggregated results. And then I'm going to go ahead and specify how I want to transpose these. So I'm going to say my row is going to consist of my time slices, so those 1 minute chunks. And then my column is going to consist of status codes. And hit enter. And so what I get here is much better. So I see at 932, I get a better representation of here are the 200s, here are the 404s, and here's everything else in between. And so this is good. However, we're not machines, so let's create something that's a little bit easier for us to digest by charting this data. What we have over here is a wide variety of different charting options that are available. So here's a bar chart. That's kind of a good view. Maybe a line chart, or rather a column chart. This is helpful. But this line chart, this is kind of what I'm looking for. This I feel like this is a good representation of my data. but the 200s and the 304s are really dominating this chart. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and filter those out. I have two ways to handle this. The first is I can go ahead and filter this out from just kind of the visual standpoint. So what I can do is I can go over to my legend over here, and I can simply say I want to click on 200, click on, what are the 304s, and now these are excluded from my chart, and now the scale is more appropriate because it's showing just all those other values. And so now I get a better feel for the peaks and valleys here. So that's one way to handle it. The other way, which is going to be a better way, is to actually filter those out of the search itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my query. I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to say where status code is equal to 200, or status code is equal to 304. And since I want to leave those out or disregard them, I'm going to go ahead right here and put an exclamation point. And so basically what I'm saying is, show me everything where the status code is not equal to 200 or 304. And now when I run this, those values are excluded from my data that I brought back. So they won't show up in the graph. They won't show up in the messages either, since I'm excluding 200s and 304s at this point. Let's keep rolling here. So now I'm looking back at the tabular results. But what I can do is I can export these results if I wanted to and share them in a text file. So what I can do is I can go ahead right there and go ahead and export those results into a CSV. So if I need to go ahead and let's see, oh, can't bring that CSV over to the screen. Sorry about that. But I'm sure you've seen CSVs before. But basically, it will allow us to take all that data and export it out. So you could go ahead and maybe you need to bring it into another system, or somebody else needs to look at it. So a couple different ways to handle that. Let me go ahead and jump back into the slides just to make sure we're all caught up. So back into the slides. What we just went through are these steps related to the query syntax. So we use keywords and operators separated by pipes to build on top of each other. And here's an example. So we started with our metadata and keywords, which was that first line. So essentially, starting to narrow down that scope. We used parsing to go ahead and identify fields. Once we identified those fields, then we were able to start to filter on those and say specifically, we only want certain status codes, or the case we used was actually the opposite, where we said, exclude these status codes. Then we used some aggregation and used that count to start to do that mathematics, and then some of the formatting to go ahead and play around with the way it was displayed. This slide I really like, particularly this funnel view is over here. It's a good idea to kind of remember this funnel. And what you have is picture a large funnel. At the very top, it's a very wide open mouth, and you can start shoving all your data in. And at the bottom, essentially, you want your results or the good stuff to come out. And so using that funnel and using the different portions of the syntax is how you would start to create that. And then ultimately, you would get your results out the bottom, essentially. Let's see. This is just going over parsing. So parsing is going to be used to extract those meaningful fields to provide structure to your data. This just shows a couple different ways to parse out your data using parse anchor, using parse regex. It actually doesn't show field extraction rules. And you can also use some other parse operators. Let's see. Filtering. So this is where we started to use the where, and in the example we used was the where not status code equals 200 304. So that was how we were start to use the filter to further filter those results from the extracted fields that we had. Then we use the aggregation to evaluate those messages and place them into groups. So we used the count originally to go ahead and do a count by status code. And then finally, we use that format to display the top desired results. So we use transpose. You could use things like top 5 to only show the top 5 values, so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and jump back into, let's go into the slide. And I just want to show you LiveTail. I'll show you a demo of it in a second. But what it's going to allow you to do is within the app, or actually via a command line interface, you can use LiveTail to get a real-time view of your logs. So essentially, I would go into new up here. This time we're going to do LiveTail. And what we have here is the ability to go ahead and specify source category. And so we can do our source category equals labs Apache access. batch access. And then in real time, we're going to see all that data that's being ingested. And so you're starting to scroll by, and it's going to come by pretty quickly because there's going to be a lot of messages. And what we can do is we can do some basic querying in here. So maybe I wanted to go ahead once again and look for that string of Mozilla. I can do M-O-Z-I-L-A, no double A's, and then go ahead, and now it will look for that keyword in there. And so if I go ahead and pause this, we see in here, here's Mozilla, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And so what this is going to help you with is if you want to see your data being ingested in real time. Maybe you set up the collector, which is going to be that tool to bring your data into Sumo Logic. You want to verify that data is coming in. This would be a good way to do so. So just wanted to introduce it to you. In some use cases, this will be very valuable. In others, you may never use LiveTail again. So certainly just wanted to introduce it. Let's go ahead and jump back into the slides for a moment. And let's go over some more examples. Sorry about that. Let's just go straight into the application and look at some of the more advanced operators. So I want to show outliers first. We looked at it a little bit briefly in the demo, but I want to go into it a little more detail here. So what I'm going to do is find my training information. Do I have any outliers in here? Let's see. Sorry about that. I should have had these open already. Let's go ahead and just use our search. So what I'm looking at is basically to see, did anybody do any thing with outliers before? Oh, here's one. Let's see if this works. All right, let me go ahead and, sorry about that. Let me, I was hoping there would be some in here. No. Okay, this will work. So let me go ahead and just clean this up. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we have here is we have outliers. And let me go ahead and speak to this. So what we're doing here is we're looking at information related to the source code. So we're looking at 4s and we're looking at 5s. But what essentially we're doing here is very basic, is we're taking our sets of data and we're going ahead and determining a threshold using standard deviation, and then going ahead and starting to plot those on a graph. And then as we do so, we are going to be able to recognize when those things occur outside the norm, essentially. So what we have here is we've started to develop a, in this example, a ratio of 400s to 500s. So you know the user is interested in seeing 400 error messages versus 500 error messages related to the status code. And so what we see down here with these is so for example, at 12:30, this is Eastern time, we see that there was expected to be between a threshold of 0.03 and 0.06 count here. And what we see is the ratio is 0.05, 0.044, and that would be within that threshold. And so the threshold is represented by this, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of cloud view. So the dark blue here are the actuals. The cloud view is the upper and lower limits. And then the pink triangles are going to be outliers, which will be outside that upper and lower limit. And so, for example, right here, we see the norm, or the threshold was expected to be between 0.04 and 0.06. It was actually 0.062, and that was outside the norm. And so as a result, that is considered an outlier. And then what we can do is we can actually be notified upon those, which is really helpful. And I'll show you how to set that up in just a moment. But here's a couple other examples. So same idea here. This time the threshold was determined between 0.04 and 0.05. And due to the fact of the standard deviation prior to that, that's why the threshold is a little more narrow. But once again, the ratio is outside that at 0.053. And so that's how we were able to go ahead and use this outlier operator to go ahead and create these and view them. So this is going to be really helpful for you to take a look at things as they're occurring and look at standard deviations and see when things, like I said, are kind of outside that norm. Another example, let me see if it's in here. Actually, it was part of our apps that I loaded. I can grab this guy. So what I want to show here, just backing, here we go, cool. Okay, so what I have here is we have all of our messages, our Apache Access messages that we've been using. So here's that raw message that we've been playing with a couple times now. I have the IP address right here. And so what I'm able to do is first I'm able to extract that IP address using, in this case, using regex up here. So basically the system is saying, hey, look for number.number.number.number and call that source IP. Once I have that source IP, what I can do is use a lookup table over here. You can see the context or the syntax for it right here. And basically say, pull all this information. If this is a public IP, pull information about the latitude, the longitude, the country code, etc. And so what I have then is for this message and for this IP right here, for example, I have my IP and I'm able to use the lookup to find that the latitude is this, the longitude is this, the city is Tucson, the country code is US, etc. So I'm starting to pull, be able to extract some information about the IP address. When I go into this view, this tabular view, I see information about the data. So I have my almost 6 million messages over here, and we see that there were almost 1 million people coming from essentially from this latitude and longitude, so 25, -80, which would be Miami, and then this many from northeast New York. What I can then do, which is really cool within Sumo, is since I have these public IP information and this latitude and longitude, I can plot it on a map. So what I can do very simply is just go to this map icon. And when I click it, all this data will be overlaid in a map. And so now just very simply using that latitude and longitude, now I can see visually, there's a lot of people coming out of, certainly a lot, out of the Northeast, some coming out of, France, Spain, Italy area, some Asia users, etc. So I can go ahead and start to dig in there and get that visual component without really doing much of, once again, that heavy lifting, just simply identifying the IP address, identifying it, and then having the lookup table go ahead and find the latitude, longitude, and all the other components of that right here. So that's a helpful tool that can be used. Let's see, I want to go ahead and show log reduce and log compare. So let's go ahead and do a new tab for those. And I'm going to go ahead and look specifically for security data and look for snort data. So let me see if there's any in here. Now I'm going to actually go ahead and show you guys how I used this earlier using the managed data collection. Oh, good. So here's some snort data, which is what I wanted to show. So I'm going to go ahead and open this in a log search. And so what I have with this snort data, let me go ahead and expand this query out just a little bit more just to get some more data in here, is what we're seeing here is, as mentioned, this is security data. And this is showing us information about different things, classification of events. So we see here sensitive data, attempted information leak, web app attack, so on and so forth. And once again, we have about 19,000 messages, 750 pages of data, and we could certainly scroll through manually, but that's not going to be good for anybody. So what we can do is use that log reduce once again to look for those commonalities in those messages. So when I do so, what I have here then is these broken out into counts. So here I have, it's just about done loading. There were just about a little bit under 10,000 attempted information leaks and about 5,000 web app attacks, and so on and so forth. And so I can see here from a quick glance and get a feel for what's going on with my classifications of these events, over the last 3 hours. So I can see here, here there's a couple, classifications of this Trojan. That's certainly concerning. But I want to bring in a new feature here called log compare. And what log compare is going to allow you to do is take this information and compare it to a different time period. So right now, what we're looking at is the last 3 hours. So from 7 a.m. Pacific to about 10 a.m. Pacific. For today, this is all the events that have occurred and grouped together. With log compare, what we can do is compare this all to a different time period. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And what's going to happen now is essentially a log reduce is going to occur for right now or for the last 3 hours. And it's going to occur for yesterday, that 3 hour time period. And so what we're comparing is from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific today and 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific yesterday. And then over here with these percentages, this is showing us the increase or the decrease in those amount of percentages or in the number of messages that have occurred in that time period. So for example, here we see a decrease by 12% of attempted denial of services. Oh, that seems like a good thing. Conversely, we see an increase of, by 49% of virus outbound bad file attachments. So maybe that's concerning. And so we can start to go ahead and use these percentages to, as it says, compare the logs. The other thing that's going to be helpful with these, and when I go to the next page, is I'm able to see all the new messages. So yesterday during this time period, there were no web application attacks, while today there are 4 new ones. And that might be of some concern. Conversely, yesterday there was an SolarWinds IP scan attempt, and today that's gone. So that might be good. Those are now falling off. And so that's how you can go ahead and start to compare those different periods. Cool. So let's go ahead and jump back into the slides just to make sure we're on track. We talked about some of the advanced lookups. We specifically went over geo lookup and outlier. Let's see. We just discussed log reduce and log compare. So we are on track. So how can I monitor my data? This was another component of from the agenda earlier that I wanted to show you. And so what we're going to use is dashboards. Here's an overview of dashboards as far as how they kind of look. So each panel is going to process the results from a single search. And then you can drill down into the corresponding query or link to another dashboard. And I demonstrated that earlier going through the demo, the Travel Logic, when we looked at the operational dashboard. We clicked into one of the panels, which brought us a link to another dashboard, which was services. And then we drilled into that query when we looked into the metrics. But let's go ahead and go through this in-app and show you how to set these up and how to utilize them. So let's say let's find the chart that I want to utilize. So I'm going to go ahead and find one in here that I already used. Oh, here's a good one. So we created this 400 to 500 ratio outlier chart. We have this panel here. We've created it. We like the feel of it, and now we want to go ahead and save it. So what we can do is we can go ahead and click on Add to Dashboard. Very simple. And what we're going to do at this point is provide a name for the panel and what dashboard do we want to add this to. So we can add this to an existing dashboard or create a new one. In this case, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm just going to call this, go with the original name of JB Test. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new dashboard. And then I'm just going to decide where do I want to save it. Do I want to save it to my personal folder? Do I want to save it to some other folder structures I've already utilized? I'm just going to save it to my personal. And now this dashboard has been created. And so now I have the panel here. And it's loading. There we go. And now I have the panel here saved for me. And so what I can do from here is I can start to do a couple different things. I can start to edit this panel. So maybe I want to make it bigger. I can go ahead and do so. I can also start to edit the dashboard. So I can go up here to these 3 dots. And maybe I want to go ahead and toggle the theme. I prefer a dark theme. And so, okay, I like this theme. Maybe I want to add a new panel. I can go to Add Panel. There we go, Add Panel. And maybe I want to add a text panel. Text. This is a text panel. Not the best test, but I think you get the idea. And so I can start to combine these to help provide context for the viewer of this dashboard. And so what I can do is I can provide this dashboard to somebody and they can get a feel, oh, let me read this little text. Oh, okay, now I know what's going on here. And then I can go ahead and start to dig in a little bit deeper. I can go ahead and dig into my query deeper. So I can go ahead, like I started to show earlier, and go ahead and click on this little icon right there to drill into my query. And now I'm specifically looking at that query that was used to create that panel. A couple other options in here. So now you've gone ahead, you've created this dashboard, and you want to go ahead and let's say you want to share it with somebody. You have the ability to use this share icon right here. And what this is going to allow you to do is decide whom do you want to share this with and what access they have. So maybe you specifically want to share this with people and you want to share this with Jim. And I want to share this with, I don't know who else is in here, Barry. And I want to say, okay, these guys can edit it. Or I can use the role-based access controls and say, I only want my analyst to be able to access this. And so I can start to kind of lock it down a little bit in that way. I can also provide a shareable URL where I can go ahead and take this URL and provide it to somebody who may not even have access to Sumo Logic, and they can go ahead and still view that dashboard. So I can take that this link and share that with other individuals. Let's go ahead and back out. The other thing I can do in here is I can add filters. So maybe I want to go ahead and let's see. I want to take my filter and I want to add a new one. And I only want to look at, let's see, what's a good one here? This is not going to be the best one, but maybe I only want to look at specific source categories. I could do, excuse me, source codes. I can go ahead and do, status codes, excuse me, sorry about that. I can go ahead and do so. So maybe I want this filter to be applied, and I only want to look at the 400 status codes, or 404s. I can go ahead and do that. And then what it's going to do is it's going to rewrite the panel to only show 404s. And in this case, there would only be, the ratio portion wouldn't work because we were looking at 400s by 500s. Now we're just looking at 404. So certainly want to use it in the appropriate context, but you can go ahead and add those filters in there. Let's see, let me go ahead. A couple other things to mention is the save query. So let's go back here to a query. So let's say I've created this query or I've modified this query, and now I want to show these options here because I think I skipped over those earlier, and it's worth knowing what these do. So I have a couple different options as to what I can do with this query. I can go ahead and bookmark it or essentially save it as a favorite. So when I do so, and once I've saved it first, it would show up in this section over here under favorites. So let me go ahead and save this. And then when I start, there it shows a bookmark of my favorites. So that's one option I have. The other is the save as. So let me go over this. So I create this query. I can certainly go ahead and save as, which is going to be important to saving it and where do I want to save it. Schedule this search we haven't discussed yet. So what I can do with the schedule this search is I can have this query run periodically, maybe have it run every 15 minutes and have it email me the results. And so maybe I get an email with information, or my peers get an email with this information about the query, about the histogram, the results, and all that information is in there. This is also where I would go ahead and set up the other mechanisms for being notified. So maybe I want to go ahead and set up a webhook so I can integrate with Slack and get a message that something's occurred. And I can go ahead and set that up right here. The other option I have is to have this occur if the following condition is met. And so what I can do here is I can have it basically alert me when outliers occur. And so instead of being notified every 15 minutes of the results, I can just say, essentially notify me when an outlier occurs. And so that way I would just get that notification in that Slack message, excuse me, like I demonstrated earlier, or was unable to demonstrate, but it showed up on my screen, just unable to do so due to screen sharing. Let's see, the other options in here are you have the ability to go ahead and share the query out. So you've created this query, And similar to the way we just showed with dashboards, you want to go ahead and share this query out with your entire organization, a specific role, a specific user, you can go ahead and do so. With this, you have two different options as far as sharing the content. You can go ahead and utilize the shareable URL, which is kind of how I showed a few moments ago. Or what you can go ahead and do is you can take advantage of the code option here, and you can actually just grab this chunk of code, copy it, or actually even just use that copy button there, and then go ahead and paste this code into a new browser or into a new query window. And when you do, all the content related to that query is going to automatically be brought in. So this is a really cool way if you're sharing a query with somebody, either internally or with our support team, or you just want to Slack them a query, rather than going ahead and copying this, copying the time and all that. Just simply paste that code in there, and it will allow them to run that as you are. Let's see. Let's go ahead and jump back to the webinar just to make sure we're on track, because I think I got just about everything we need to cover. So let's see. Yep, cool. So where do I go from here? We discussed some of the technical resources earlier, as far as the Learn tab and all the options you have under there, as far as accessing the tutorials, the cheat sheets, which are going to be helpful in having you view all the operators that are available. Certainly documentation, joining our community and participating in there is certainly going to be helpful for you. And that's really what I wanted to cover today. So any questions at this point? I'll just Okay, so I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and conclude today. If you're interested, tomorrow we'll be doing the level 2 webinar at the same time. So that will be going over some more advanced features on querying, helping you build on those learning blocks to become a better Sumo user. That will be the power user content. And then finally, just kind of a last plug for the certification. So what we did today was the QuickStart webinar, which is one of the prerequisites, as it says right here, for the preparation for level 1. The other portion will be accessing that tutorial, which, as mentioned, is available in app. So if you want to just go into the application, go to Learn, and then right here will be that using Sumo Logic tutorial, which basically takes the steps that I did today and combines them. So goes through the steps of certainly viewing your data, searching for that log information, charting that status code information, creating the dashboards, and then modifying them and doing an alert. So great. So thank you everyone for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.